In the grand halls of Valdoria's ancient palace, where portraits of kings and queens have watched over centuries of royal succession, a single guard's discovery threatens to topple everything the kingdom believes about its rightful rulers. What Marcus Thorne witnessed in the queen consort's private chambers would either save the realm or destroy it forever. But some secrets are worth dying for, and others are worth killing to protect. The autumn rain hammered against the towering windows of Valdoria Palace as Marcus Thorne completed his evening patrol through the East Wing. 23 years of faithful service had taught him to notice everything and question nothing. Tonight, however, something felt different. The corridors that usually hummed with the quiet efficiency of palace life seemed unnaturally still. Marcus had been assigned to the Royal Guard fresh out of military academy, a young man from the countryside who believed in duty above all else. His father had served the crown before him, and his grandfather before that. The Thorne family had protected Valdoria's monarchs for 3 generations, never questioning, never wavering in their loyalty. King Edmund VII ruled Valdoria with wisdom and compassion, beloved by his people for his fair governance and charitable works. He had married Lady Isabella Cortez 15 years ago, making her queen consort after his first wife, Queen Catherine, died tragically in a riding accident. The kingdom had eventually accepted Isabella, though whispers still followed her through the palace halls about her humble origins and rapid rise to power. As Marcus rounded the corner toward the queen consort's private study, he noticed a thin strip of light beneath the heavy oak door. It was past midnight, well beyond the time when Her Majesty typically retired. Protocol dictated that he should continue his patrol, but something in his gut told him to pause. The voices inside were muted but urgent. Marcus recognized Queen Isabella's distinctive accent, still carrying traces of her homeland despite years of royal tutoring. But there was another voice, one that made his blood run cold. Lord Chancellor Aldred Blackwood, the king's most trusted advisor, was speaking in hushed conspiratorial tones. Marcus knew he should walk away. Eavesdropping on the royal family was grounds for immediate dismissal, possibly even imprisonment. But the words he caught made his feet feel rooted to the ancient stone floor. "The documents are nearly complete," Blackwood was saying. "Once we establish the precedent, young Prince William's claim becomes questionable." Prince William, the king's 19-year-old son from his first marriage, was heir apparent to the Valdorian throne. Marcus had watched the boy grow up in these very halls, had seen him transform from a mischievous child into a thoughtful young man who took his future responsibilities seriously. The prince spent his days studying statecraft, meeting with common citizens to understand their needs, and preparing to one day rule with the same wisdom as his father. "And you're certain the historical precedent will hold?" Isabella's voice carried a tension Marcus had never heard before. "The old law is clear, Your Majesty. If we can prove that succession through the female line takes precedence in cases where the male heir lacks legitimate royal bloodline on both sides, then your son Lucas would be next in line."
Marcus felt his world shift beneath his feet.
Prince Lucas was Isabella's 7-year-old son, born 3 years after her marriage to King Edmund. The boy was sweet and innocent, unaware of the political machinations swirling around him. But what Blackwood was suggesting seemed impossible. Prince William was legitimate, the son of King Edmund and Queen Catherine, both of unquestionably royal blood. The conversation continued, and Marcus learned details that would haunt him for months to come. Ancient documents had been discovered in the palace archives, supposedly proving that Queen Catherine's lineage contained a break in royal succession 2 centuries earlier. If these documents were authentic, it would mean that Prince William, despite being the king's biological son, lacked the pure royal bloodline required by Valdoria's most ancient laws. But Marcus had studied history as part of his guard training. He knew the stories of Queen Catherine's family, the noble house of Ravencrest. They had been royal for over 300 years. The idea that their bloodline was somehow tainted seemed preposterous. "The genealogy experts we've consulted confirm the findings," Blackwood continued. "But we need to present this carefully. The king must believe this discovery is genuine, not orchestrated." Isabella's response chilled Marcus to the bone. "Edmund loves William like his own son. This will break his heart. Sometimes the crown requires painful sacrifices, Your Majesty. Prince Lucas is young enough that he could be properly groomed for rule without the complications that Prince William's current education might present. A clean slate, so to speak." Marcus realized he was witnessing something far more sinister than a simple succession dispute. This was a carefully orchestrated plan to manipulate historical records and deceive the king himself. Queen Isabella, the woman the kingdom had learned to respect despite her foreign origins, was actively working to disinherit the rightful heir in favor of her own son. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor signaled the meeting's end. Marcus quickly moved away from the door, his mind racing. As he continued his patrol, muscle memory guiding him through familiar corridors, he grappled with the weight of what he discovered. By dawn, Marcus had made his decision. He couldn't simply ignore what he'd heard. Prince William deserved to know about the threat to his inheritance. King Edmund deserved to know about his wife's betrayal. The kingdom deserved to know the truth. But Marcus also understood the dangerous position he was in. Queen Isabella and Lord Blackwood had royal authority on their side. Who would believe the word of a simple guard against theirs? He needed proof, and getting it would require risks that could cost him everything he'd worked for. The next morning brought the first test of Marcus's resolve. During the changing of the guard ceremony, he found himself standing mere feet from Queen Isabella as she passed through the courtyard with her morning entourage. Their eyes met briefly, and Marcus felt a chill of recognition. Had she somehow sensed his presence outside her study the night before? Prince William appeared in the courtyard shortly after, leading his horse back from an early morning ride. At 19, he possessed his father's strong jaw and his late mother's intelligent eyes. Marcus watched as the prince greeted the stable hands by name, asking about their families and showing genuine interest in their responses. This was a young man who would rule with compassion and wisdom, just like his father. The contrast with 7-year-old Prince Lucas was stark. While Lucas was certainly a charming child, he was still years away from understanding the complexities of leadership. The idea of bypassing William in favor of a child seemed not just unjust, but potentially disastrous for the kingdom. Marcus spent the following days carefully observing the key players in this unfolding drama. Lord Blackwood moved through the palace with his usual air of authority, but Marcus noticed new patterns. The Lord Chancellor was meeting frequently with court genealogists and legal scholars, always behind closed doors. Documents were being moved in and out of the archives with unusual frequency. Queen Isabella maintained her public composure, attending royal functions and charity events as expected. But Marcus noticed subtle changes in her behavior around Prince William. Where she had previously treated her stepson with maternal warmth, there was now a careful distance, a formality that hadn't existed before. Most troubling was King Edmund himself. The monarch seemed unaware of the conspiracy unfolding around him, continuing his daily routine of governance and family time with both his sons. Marcus watched the king during a private moment in the palace gardens, teaching young Lucas how to tend the royal roses, while Prince William studied nearby. The scene was so peaceful, so normal, that it made the hidden betrayal even more heartbreaking. As the weeks passed, Marcus realized he needed allies if he was going to expose this plot successfully. He began reaching out carefully to other palace staff who had served the royal family for years. There was Agnes Morley, the head housekeeper who had cared for Prince William since he was a baby. There was Sir Thomas Fletcher, an aging knight who had served as the late Queen Catherine's personal guard and knew her family history better than anyone. The challenge was approaching these potential allies without revealing too much too quickly. Marcus had to be certain of their loyalty to Prince William before risking exposure of what he'd discovered. One wrong word to the wrong person could result in his immediate arrest for treason. His first breakthrough came through Agnes Morley. The elderly housekeeper had noticed the same changes in Queen Isabella's behavior that Marcus had observed. During a carefully orchestrated conversation in the servants' quarters, Marcus was able to gauge Agnes's concerns without directly revealing his own knowledge. "Something's not right in the upper floors," Agnes confided one evening as they folded linens together. "Her Majesty's been asking strange questions about Prince William's childhood, about his mother's family." Questions she never asked before. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. What kind of questions? About lineage, about family records. She wanted to know if Queen Catherine ever mentioned any family secrets, any concerns about bloodlines or inheritance. It struck me as odd, given that Queen Catherine's been gone for over 15 years. This confirmed that Isabella's interest in challenging William's succession wasn't recent. She had been planning this for some time, gathering information and building her case methodically. Marcus realized that the documents Blackwood had mentioned might not be genuine historical discoveries but carefully crafted forgeries designed to support a predetermined conclusion. Sir Thomas Fletcher proved to be an even more valuable ally. The old knight's loyalty to Queen Catherine's memory ran deep, and his knowledge of royal genealogy was encyclopedic. When Marcus carefully broached the subject of succession law and bloodline requirements, Sir Thomas's reaction was immediate and passionate. "Prince William's bloodline is as pure as any in Europe," the knight declared firmly. "I knew Queen Catherine's family personally. The House of Ravencrest has maintained detailed genealogical records for centuries. Anyone who suggests otherwise is either ignorant or malicious." Marcus realized he had found not just an ally, but someone with the expertise and moral authority to challenge whatever false evidence Isabella and Blackwood were preparing. Sir Thomas's reputation for integrity was unquestioned, and his intimate knowledge of royal history would be crucial in exposing any forgeries or misrepresentations. As autumn deepened into winter, Marcus began to see signs that Isabella and Blackwood's plan was moving toward implementation. Legal scholars were being brought in from other kingdoms, supposedly to conduct research on historical precedents for succession disputes. The court genealogist, a nervous man named Professor Whitmore, seemed increasingly agitated and was seen entering and leaving Blackwood's office at all hours. The breaking point came on a cold December evening when Marcus overheard another conversation, this time between Blackwood and Professor Whitmore in the palace library. The genealogist was expressing serious doubts about the authenticity of documents he was being asked to verify. "Lord Chancellor, I must insist that we proceed more carefully," Whitmore was saying, his voice shaking with nervous energy. "The documents you've shown me regarding the House of Ravencrest contain inconsistencies that trouble me greatly." Blackwood's response was cold and threatening. "Professor, your job is to verify what we've discovered, not to question the integrity of historical records that have been hidden away for centuries. The Queen Consort has made it clear that accuracy in this matter is of utmost importance to the stability of the realm." Marcus understood the implication immediately. Professor Whitmore was being pressured to authenticate documents that he suspected were forgeries. The poor man was caught between his professional integrity and the political pressure being applied by the highest levels of the royal court. This conversation gave Marcus the final piece of evidence he needed. The plot against Prince William wasn't just based on questionable historical interpretation. It was actively built on falsified documents. Isabella and Blackwood weren't just manipulating succession law, they were committing outright fraud against the crown itself. As winter settled over Valdoria Palace, Marcus knew that time was running short. Soon, Isabella and Blackwood would present their evidence to King Edmund. And once that happened, the wheels of royal succession would begin turning in ways that might be impossible to reverse. Marcus had to act, and he had to act soon. The question that haunted his sleepless nights was how to expose the truth without destroying himself in the process. He was a simple guard challenging the Queen Consort and the Lord Chancellor, two of the most powerful people in the kingdom. Even with allies like Agnes and Sir Thomas, the odds seemed overwhelming. But as Marcus stood watch in the cold palace corridors, thinking of Prince William's kind treatment of the servants and King Edmund's trusting nature, he knew he couldn't remain silent. Some betrayals were too great to ignore, and some truths were too important to keep hidden. The crown's secret was about to be revealed, and Marcus Thorne would either be its hero or its victim. Part 2. The January snow fell heavily on Valdoria Palace, as Marcus Thorne finalized his plans to expose Queen Isabella's conspiracy. 3 months had passed since that first overheard conversation, and the web of deception had only grown more complex. Marcus now understood that he wasn't just fighting to protect Prince William's inheritance, he was battling to preserve the very integrity of the Valdorian monarchy itself. His alliance with Agnes Morley and Sir Thomas Fletcher had proven invaluable, but it had also revealed the true scope of the threat they faced. Through careful investigation, they had discovered that Lord Blackwood's influence extended far beyond the palace walls. Several minor nobles who had been granted recent favors by the crown were quietly supporting the succession challenge, apparently promised greater influence under a future King Lucas, with Queen Isabella as regent. The most disturbing discovery came through Agnes's network of servant connections. Isabella had been secretly meeting with representatives from her homeland of Solaria, a neighboring kingdom that had long coveted Valdoria's prosperous trading routes. The implications were staggering. If Lucas became king with Isabella as his regent, Valdoria might effectively become a puppet state controlled by foreign interests. Marcus had spent weeks gathering concrete evidence of these meetings, carefully documenting times, dates, and participants. The Queen Consort's deception wasn't just personal ambition. It was potentially treasonous collaboration with foreign powers. This revelation transformed Marcus's mission from protecting a prince to defending the sovereignty of his entire kingdom. The challenge remained how to present this information to King Edmund without being dismissed as a paranoid guard spreading palace gossip. Marcus needed irrefutable proof, and he needed a way to deliver it that would ensure the king's attention and belief. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Professor Whitmore himself. The court genealogist, increasingly uncomfortable with the pressure to authenticate questionable documents, had begun keeping detailed notes about the inconsistencies he'd discovered. When approached carefully by Sir Thomas, Whitmore revealed that he'd been asked to verify documents that contained anachronistic language, impossible dates, and genealogical claims that contradicted well-established historical records. "I've served this court for 20 years," Whitmore confided to Sir Thomas during a secret meeting in the palace archives. "I've never been asked to compromise my professional integrity like this. The documents they want me to authenticate aren't just questionable. They're clearly fabricated." Sir Thomas convinced Whitmore to secretly document his findings, creating a detailed analysis that would prove the forgery beyond any reasonable doubt. This professional assessment, combined with Marcus's evidence of the foreign meetings, would provide the kind of substantive proof that even Queen Isabella and Lord Blackwood couldn't dismiss. Meanwhile, Marcus had been carefully observing the royal family dynamics, looking for the right moment to approach the king. Edmund VII was a thoughtful monarch who valued evidence over emotion, but he was also a husband who loved his wife and wanted to believe the best of her. Timing would be crucial to ensure that the king received the information with an open mind rather than defensive suspicion. The opportunity came during the annual Winter Festival, a week-long celebration that brought together nobles from across the kingdom. Prince William was scheduled to lead several ceremonial events, demonstrating his readiness for future leadership. If Isabella and Blackwood were going to make their move against his succession, it would likely be soon after the festival, when his public profile was at its highest. Marcus decided to approach Sir Thomas with a plan to reach the king through official channels. Rather than risk being dismissed as an insubordinate guard, they would present their evidence through Sir Thomas's legitimate position as a knight of the realm. His decades of faithful service gave him the right to request a private audience with the king on matters of royal security. The plan required precise coordination. Professor Whitmore would provide documented proof of the forged genealogical records. Agnes would testify about the Queen Consort's suspicious inquiries and behavioral changes. Marcus would present his carefully gathered evidence of the secret foreign meetings. Sir Thomas would serve as the primary spokesman, lending credibility to accusations that might otherwise seem incredible. As they prepared for this confrontation, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Lord Blackwood had always been perceptive about palace politics, and the increased activity around the archives and genealogical records hadn't gone unnoticed. There were signs that security around Queen Isabella had been quietly increased, and several guards who might have been sympathetic to Prince William had been reassigned to distant posts. The tension reached a breaking point when Agnes discovered that someone had been searching her private quarters. Nothing had been taken, but her personal papers had clearly been examined. The message was clear. Isabella and Blackwood knew that their plan was being investigated, and they were taking steps to protect themselves. Marcus realized that their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. If they waited much longer, key evidence might disappear, and potential witnesses might be silenced or discredited. He convinced Sir Thomas that they needed to move immediately, even if their preparation wasn't completely perfect. The night before Sir Thomas was scheduled to request his audience with the king, Marcus made a discovery that changed everything. During his patrol through the palace's upper floors, he witnessed Queen Isabella in a heated argument with someone on her private balcony. The conversation was in Salarian, but Marcus had picked up enough of the language during his guard training to understand the general meaning. Isabella was receiving orders from someone outside the palace, someone who was clearly in a position of authority over her. The conversation involved timelines, contingency plans, and references to Phase 2 of an operation that would begin once Prince William's succession was successfully challenged. Marcus realized that the Queen Consort wasn't just ambitious for her son, she was an active agent working to deliver Valdoria into foreign hands. This revelation elevated their situation from a palace intrigue to a matter of national security. Marcus knew that approaching the king through normal channels might not be sufficient. If Isabella suspected that her communications had been compromised, she might accelerate her timeline or activate contingency plans that could threaten the king's safety directly. After an emergency midnight meeting with Sir Thomas and Agnes, they decided on a bolder approach. Rather than requesting a formal audience, Sir Thomas would use his access to the king's private chapel during morning prayers to deliver their evidence directly. It was irregular and potentially career-ending, but it guaranteed that the king would receive their information before Isabella and Blackwood could interfere. The morning of their planned revelation dawned clear and cold. Marcus positioned himself strategically around the chapel to ensure that no one could interrupt Sir Thomas's conversation with the king. Agnes and Professor Whitmore waited in predetermined locations with their evidence ready to present if summoned. King Edmund arrived for his morning prayers at exactly 7 o'clock, as was his custom. Sir Thomas was already waiting, kneeling in apparent prayer, but actually reviewing his presentation one final time. As the king entered the small private chapel, Marcus felt his heart racing with nervous anticipation. What happened next would be remembered in Valdorian history as the chapel revelation. Sir Thomas approached the king with the respect and formality befitting his station, but also with the urgency of someone delivering crucial intelligence about threats to the realm. "Your Majesty," Sir Thomas began carefully, "I have discovered evidence of a conspiracy against the crown that requires your immediate attention." King Edmund's initial reaction was skepticism. Accusations of conspiracy were not uncommon in royal courts, and most proved to be based on misunderstandings or personal grievances. But as Sir Thomas presented Professor Whitmore's analysis of the forged documents, the king's expression grew increasingly serious. "You're telling me that the genealogical evidence questioning Prince William's bloodline is completely fabricated?" the king asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that Marcus had rarely heard. "Not just fabricated, Your Majesty, but created with the specific intent to deceive you and alter the succession illegally. But that's not the worst of it." When Sir Thomas revealed Marcus's evidence of the secret meetings with Solarian representatives, King Edmund's face went pale. The monarch understood immediately that his wife's betrayal extended far beyond personal ambition into the realm of treason against the crown itself. Marcus was summoned to provide first-hand testimony about what he'd witnessed. Standing before his king in the intimate setting of the royal chapel, he recounted the conversations he'd overheard, the suspicious activities he'd documented, and the foreign communications he'd intercepted. With each revelation, the king's shock deepened into cold fury. The most devastating moment came when King Edmund realized the full implications of his wife's deception. Not only had she been planning to disinherit his beloved son William, but she had been preparing to place her young son Lucas on the throne as a puppet ruler controlled by foreign interests. The kingdom that Edmund had spent his life protecting was being sold out from within his own household. Professor Whitmore was brought in to present his technical analysis of the forged documents. His scholarly expertise left no doubt that the genealogical claims against Prince William were completely without foundation. The documents weren't just questionable. They were crude fabrications that couldn't withstand professional scrutiny. Agnes provided the final piece of evidence by detailing Queen Isabella's systematic gathering of information about the royal family's private affairs, her cultivation of supporters among the nobility, and her increasingly cold treatment of Prince William as her plans developed. King Edmund listened to it all in silence, his royal composure masking what Marcus could only imagine was devastating personal betrayal. When the presentations were complete, the king sat quietly for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what he'd learned. "How long has this been developing?" the king finally asked. "Based on our investigation, Your Majesty, we believe Queen Isabella has been planning this for at least 2 years, possibly longer," Sir Thomas replied. "The foreign connections appear to have been established shortly after Prince Lucas's birth." The realization that his wife had been betraying him almost from the moment their son was born seemed to strike the king like a physical blow. Marcus watched as the monarch he'd served faithfully for over 2 decades struggled to reconcile the woman he'd loved with the traitor she'd revealed herself to be. King Edmund's response, when it came, was measured but decisive. "This evidence must be verified independently before any action is taken. But if what you've presented is accurate, then we're dealing with treason at the highest levels of the court." The king instructed Sir Thomas to gather additional evidence while maintaining absolute secrecy about their investigation. Professor Whitmore was placed under royal protection to prevent any attempts to silence or intimidate him. Agnes was asked to continue monitoring Queen Isabella's activities while appearing to maintain normal household routines. Most significantly, the king ordered increased security around Prince William without explanation. The heir to the throne would be protected while the full scope of the conspiracy was investigated, but he would not yet be informed about the threats against him. As Marcus left the chapel that morning, he felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had successfully alerted the king to the conspiracy, but they had also escalated a dangerous situation that could have unpredictable consequences. Isabella and Blackwood would soon realize that their plan had been discovered, and their response could threaten not just the plotters, but anyone who had exposed them. The next few days would determine whether Marcus's courage in speaking truth to power would save the kingdom, or destroy everything he'd worked to protect. The crown's secret was secret no more. But the most dangerous phase of the conspiracy was just beginning. King Edmund now knew the truth about his wife's betrayal, but knowledge and action were two very different things. The monarch faced impossible choices: expose the treason and destroy his marriage while traumatizing his young son Lucas, or find some way to neutralize the threat while preserving what remained of his family. Marcus had done his duty by revealing the conspiracy, but he understood that the real battle for Valdoria's future was just beginning. Part 3. The week following the chapel revelation transformed Valdoria Palace into a carefully orchestrated theatre of normalcy, hiding desperate investigation beneath. King Edmund continued his daily routines with remarkable composure, but Marcus could see the toll that uncovering his wife's betrayal was taking on the monarch. The king's morning prayers lasted longer, his evening walks through the palace gardens became solitary affairs, and the warmth that had always characterized his interactions with Queen Isabella now carried an almost imperceptible chill. Marcus found himself in an increasingly dangerous position. His revelations had made him invaluable to the king's investigation, but they had also marked him as a target for elimination. Lord Blackwood's network of loyalists within the palace had begun asking subtle questions about Marcus's recent activities, and twice he had noticed unfamiliar guards observing his patrol routes with unusual interest. Sir Thomas Fletcher had been placed in charge of the covert investigation, operating under direct orders from King Edmund to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy while maintaining absolute secrecy. The old knight had recruited a small team of absolutely trusted palace staff to assist in gathering evidence. But even this expanded investigation remained desperately vulnerable to discovery. The breakthrough in their evidence gathering came from an unexpected source, Prince William himself. The heir apparent had noticed the subtle changes in palace atmosphere and his stepmother's behavior toward him. During a private conversation with Sir Thomas, the prince revealed that Queen Isabella had recently been asking him detailed questions about his plans for the kingdom once he became king. She seemed particularly interested in my thoughts about foreign trade agreements and military alliances, Prince William told Sir Thomas during a confidential meeting. I thought she was simply taking a more active interest in statecraft, but now I wonder if there was another purpose. Sir Thomas realized that Isabella had been gathering intelligence about William's future policies to share with her Solarian contacts. This wasn't just about replacing one heir with another. It was about ensuring that Valdoria's future leadership would serve foreign interests regardless of who occupied the throne. The investigation revealed that Isabella's deception extended even deeper than they had initially suspected. Financial records uncovered by Agnes showed that the Queen Consort had been receiving regular payments from Solarian sources, disguised as charitable donations to her various royal foundations. These funds had been used to influence court appointments, bribe minor nobles, and finance the creation of the forged genealogical documents. Most alarmingly, they discovered evidence that Isabella and Blackwood had been slowly poisoning King Edmund's relationship with his son William. Carefully crafted reports about the prince's activities had been designed to make him appear irresponsible or disloyal, while Isabella positioned herself as a voice of reason, protecting the king from disappointment in his heir. Marcus learned about this psychological manipulation when he overheard a conversation between King Edmund and Sir Thomas in the royal study. The king was reviewing months of reports about Prince William that he now realized had been deliberately distorted to create doubt about his son's fitness for rule. I actually began to question whether William was ready for the responsibilities of kingship, King Edmund admitted, his voice heavy with regret. Isabella was so subtle in her suggestions, so careful to frame her concerns as maternal worry rather than criticism. I can see now how she was systematically undermining my confidence in my own son. The emotional toll of these revelations on King Edmund was becoming increasingly apparent. Marcus watched the monarch struggle not just with his wife's betrayal, but with his own guilt at having doubted Prince William based on manufactured evidence. The king's trust in his own judgment had been shaken along with his faith in the woman he had loved. Meanwhile, Queen Isabella and Lord Blackwood had begun to suspect that their conspiracy was under investigation. Security around the Queen Consort's private apartments had been increased, and several of her Solarian contacts had departed the kingdom unexpectedly. Most tellingly, the timeline for presenting their challenge to Prince William's succession had been suddenly accelerated. Professor Whitmore, still under royal protection, reported that he was being pressured to complete his authentication of the forged documents immediately rather than conducting the thorough analysis that proper genealogical research required. Blackwood had made it clear that delay was no longer acceptable, regardless of the professor's professional concerns. This acceleration of the conspiracy's timeline created a crisis for King Edmund's investigation. They needed more time to gather complete evidence and develop a strategy for neutralizing the threat without causing irreparable damage to the monarchy's reputation. But Isabella and Blackwood were moving toward implementation regardless of whether their preparation was complete. The situation reached a critical point when Agnes discovered that Queen Isabella was planning to present her succession challenge at the upcoming Grand Council meeting, where representatives from across the kingdom gathered to discuss matters of royal policy. This public forum would give legitimacy to her claims and make it much more difficult for King Edmund to quietly resolve the crisis. Marcus understood that they were approaching the moment when careful investigation would have to give way to decisive action. The king could not allow Isabella to present fraudulent evidence to the Grand Council, but stopping her would require revealing the conspiracy publicly and destroying any remaining possibility of a private resolution. The weight of this approaching confrontation was affecting everyone involved in the investigation. Sir Thomas, despite his decades of experience in court politics, seemed exhausted by the constant secrecy and the magnitude of the betrayal they were uncovering. Agnes had begun showing signs of the strain, jumping at unexpected sounds, and checking constantly to ensure she wasn't being followed. For Marcus, the most difficult aspect was maintaining his normal guard duties, while knowing that the Queen Consort he was sworn to protect was actively working to destroy the kingdom he had pledged to defend. Every interaction with Isabella required careful control of his expression and demeanor to avoid revealing his knowledge of her treason. The psychological pressure reached a breaking point when Marcus overheard Queen Isabella speaking to young Prince Lucas about his future as king. The 7-year-old was being carefully prepared for a role he didn't understand, filled with promises about the wonderful life he would have ruling Valdoria with his mother's guidance. "You'll be the youngest king in Valdorian history," Isabella told her son in the palace nursery, her voice full of artificial warmth. "And everyone will love you for the changes we'll make to help our kingdom become stronger and more prosperous." Marcus realized that Lucas was as much a victim of his mother's conspiracy as Prince William. The young boy was being manipulated into a position that would ultimately serve foreign interests rather than his own happiness or the kingdom's welfare. If the conspiracy succeeded, Lucas would spend his life as a puppet ruler, never understanding that his crown had been purchased through betrayal and fraud. This realization strengthened Marcus's resolve to see the investigation through to its conclusion. The stakes weren't just about royal succession or political power. They were about protecting innocent children from becoming pawns in their mother's treasonous schemes. King Edmund had begun developing a strategy for confronting the conspiracy while minimizing damage to the monarchy and his family. The plan required perfect timing and coordination between multiple elements, including the exposure of the forged documents, the revelation of the foreign connections, and the protection of both Prince William and Prince Lucas from the resulting scandal. The king's approach demonstrated the wisdom and compassion that had made him beloved by his subjects. Rather than simply arresting Isabella and Blackwood for treason, he was seeking a solution that would neutralize the threat while providing some protection for his young son Lucas, who bore no responsibility for his mother's betrayal. However, Marcus understood that the king's merciful approach carried significant risks. Isabella and Blackwood were intelligent and ruthless adversaries who would not hesitate to escalate their tactics if they sensed that their conspiracy was in danger. The investigation team needed to be prepared for desperate measures, including potential violence against anyone who threatened to expose the truth. This concern proved prescient when Professor Whitmore reported an attempted break-in at his private residence. Nothing had been stolen, but his research notes had been thoroughly searched, and there were signs that someone had been looking specifically for his analysis of the forged documents. The message was clear. The conspirators were prepared to use intimidation and potentially worse to protect their secrets. King Edmund responded by placing all key witnesses under increased protection and accelerating his own timeline for confronting the conspiracy. The Grand Council meeting was only days away, and the king could not risk allowing Isabella to present her fraudulent evidence to the assembled nobles of the kingdom. The final phase of the investigation focused on documenting the conspiracy's foreign connections in sufficient detail to prove treason charges if necessary. Marcus worked with Sir Thomas to create a comprehensive timeline of Isabella's contacts with Solarian representatives, while Agnes gathered evidence of the financial transactions that had funded the conspiracy. Their most significant discovery came when they uncovered communications revealing that the conspiracy extended beyond simply changing Valdoria's succession. The Solarian government had been planning to use Isabella's influence to negotiate favorable trade agreements, gain access to Valdorian military secrets, and eventually incorporate the kingdom into their sphere of influence through a series of gradually implemented policies. This evidence transformed the situation from a domestic succession dispute into a matter of international espionage and foreign infiltration. King Edmund now understood that his wife hadn't just betrayed him personally. She had been systematically compromising the sovereignty and security of his entire kingdom. The weight of this realization seemed to age the king visibly. Marcus watched as the monarch he had served faithfully for over 2 decades struggled with the knowledge that the woman he had loved and trusted had been working against everything he held dear from almost the moment of their marriage. As the Grand Council meeting approached, Tension throughout the palace reached nearly unbearable levels. Everyone involved in the investigation understood that the next few days would determine not just the future of the Valdorian succession, but the independence and integrity of the kingdom itself. Marcus found himself thinking constantly about the moment when he had first decided to listen at Queen Isabella's door, rather than continuing his patrol. That single choice had led to the discovery of a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of Valdorian society. He wondered if a different guard might have simply walked past, allowing the betrayal to continue until it was too late to stop. The responsibility weighing on him was enormous. The future of the kingdom now depended partly on the actions of a guard who had simply been doing his duty when he stumbled upon evidence of treason. Marcus understood that history would judge not just whether he had done the right thing, but whether he had done it well enough to save his country from foreign domination. As the investigation entered its final phase, Marcus prepared himself for whatever consequences his revelations might bring. He had exposed the truth, but truth alone would not be enough to protect Valdoria from the forces arrayed against it. The real test was about to begin. Part 4. The morning of the Grand Council meeting dawned grey and forbidding over Valdoria Palace, as if the weather itself reflected the tension that had been building for weeks. Marcus Thorne stood at his assigned post outside the council chamber, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether his kingdom survived as an independent nation or fell victim to the most sophisticated betrayal in its history. King Edmund had spent the previous night in conference with Sir Thomas Fletcher, finalizing their strategy for exposing Queen Isabella's conspiracy while protecting the innocent and preserving what remained of the monarchy's dignity. The plan they had developed was complex and risky, requiring precise timing and the cooperation of several key figures who still didn't fully understand the magnitude of what they were helping to prevent. Inside the Great Council chamber, representatives from across Valdoria had gathered for what they believed would be a routine session of royal governance. The kingdom's most powerful nobles, military commanders, and civic leaders filled the ancient hall, unaware that they were about to witness a confrontation that would be remembered for generations. Marcus watched through the chamber's side entrance as Queen Isabella made her entrance, accompanied by Lord Blackwood and carrying a leather portfolio that undoubtedly contained the forged genealogical documents they intended to present as evidence against Prince William's succession rights. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed victory was assured, greeting the assembled nobles with the gracious demeanor that had helped her ascend from foreign commoner to queen consort. Prince William sat in his designated place as heir apparent, still unaware of the threat that had been building against him for months. Marcus felt a surge of protective anger as he watched the young prince, who had spent years preparing to serve his kingdom with wisdom and compassion, unknowingly facing the possibility of losing everything through fraud and manipulation. 7-year-old Prince Lucas was not present, having been kept away from the council chamber by his tutors on his mother's instructions. Marcus understood now that Isabella had been planning to bring her son forward only after successfully challenging William's legitimacy, presenting Lucas as the rightful heir, who would save the kingdom from the supposed problems with the succession. King Edmund entered the chamber with his usual dignity, but Marcus could see the signs of strain that weeks of investigation and personal betrayal had created. The king had lost weight, and there was a hardness around his eyes that spoke of trust destroyed and innocence lost. Yet his bearing remained regal as he took his place at the head of the council chamber. The session began with routine matters of governance, but Marcus could feel the tension building as Queen Isabella and Lord Blackwood exchanged meaningful glances. They were clearly waiting for the appropriate moment to present their challenge to Prince William's succession, timing their revelation for maximum impact on the assembled nobles. King Edmund allowed the normal proceedings to continue for nearly an hour before making his move. Rising from the throne with deliberate formality, he addressed the assembled council with words that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. Lords and ladies of Valdoria, we have gathered today to address matters of governance and the future security of our realm. However, before we proceed with our planned agenda, I must inform you of a grave threat to the integrity of our kingdom that has recently been discovered. The chamber fell silent as the king's words registered with the assembled nobles. This was clearly not part of the expected proceedings, and the formal tone suggested something of extraordinary importance. Queen Isabella's face remained composed, but Marcus noticed a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested growing alarm. Lord Blackwood shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confidence beginning to waver as he realized the king was deviating from the script they had expected. It has come to my attention, King Edmund continued, that certain individuals within our court have been engaged in a conspiracy to manipulate the royal succession through fraudulent means, while simultaneously collaborating with foreign powers to compromise our kingdom's sovereignty. The reaction in the chamber was immediate and dramatic. Nobles began murmuring among themselves, trying to understand what the king was alleging and who might be involved. Queen Isabella's composure finally cracked slightly, a flush of alarm spreading across her features as she realized her conspiracy was being exposed rather than implemented. King Edmund gestured to Sir Thomas Fletcher, who rose from his position carrying a portfolio of evidence that represented weeks of careful investigation.
The old knight's reputation for integrity and loyalty was unquestioned by anyone in the chamber, lending immediate credibility to whatever revelations were about to be presented.
Sir Thomas will present evidence of this conspiracy, the king announced, including documentation of forged genealogical records, evidence of treasonous communication with foreign agents, and testimony from witnesses who observed these criminal activities firsthand.
Marcus watched as Queen Isabella and Lord Blackwood exchanged desperate glances.
They had clearly not anticipated this turn of events, and their carefully laid plans were collapsing in the most public possible forum. Blackwood half rose from his seat as if to object, but the king's stern gaze forced him back down. Sir Thomas began his presentation methodically, first addressing the forged documents that had been created to challenge Prince William's bloodline. Professor Whitmore, who had been secretly brought into the chamber, provided detailed technical analysis proving that the genealogical claims were fabricated using anachronistic language. These documents, Professor Whitmore explained to the stunned assembly, contain references to events that had not yet occurred when they were supposedly written, and used linguistic patterns that did not exist in the historical periods they claimed to represent. They are not ancient discoveries. They are recent fabrications designed to deceive this very council. The revelation that someone had attempted to manipulate the royal succession through forged evidence sent shockwaves through the chamber.
Several nobles demanded to know who was responsible for such an outrageous breach of royal protocol and national security.
King Edmund allowed the gravity of this first revelation to settle before Sir Thomas moved to even more serious accusations. The evidence of Queen Isabella's secret communications with Solarian representatives was presented through documented meetings, financial transactions, and intercepted correspondence that painted a clear picture of systematic betrayal. Marcus found himself called to testify about the conversations he had overheard and the suspicious activities he had observed. Standing before the assembled nobility of his kingdom, he recounted the night when he had first heard Queen Isabella and Lord Blackwood discussing their plans to disinherit Prince William in favor of the more malleable Prince Lucas. His testimony was straightforward and factual, but the implications were devastating. A royal guard had witnessed the queen consort plotting against her stepson while coordinating with foreign agents to compromise Valdorian independence. The accused sat just yards away, unable to deny evidence that had been carefully documented and corroborated by multiple witnesses. Agnes Morley was called to testify about the Queen Consort's suspicious inquiries into royal family history and her systematic gathering of information that would later be shared with foreign contacts. The head housekeeper's decades of faithful service gave her words tremendous weight with the assembled nobles. The most damaging evidence came when Sir Thomas revealed the full extent of the Solarian involvement in the conspiracy. Communications intercepted by palace security showed that Isabella's handlers had been planning to use her influence to gradually transform Valdoria into a vassal state, through economic agreements, military cooperation, and political pressure. Queen Isabella was not acting as an ambitious mother seeking advantage for her son, Sir Thomas explained to the horrified assembly. She was functioning as an agent of a foreign power, systematically compromising our kingdom's independence while preparing to place a puppet ruler on our throne. The chamber erupted in angry voices, as nobles demanded justice for such unprecedented betrayal. The idea that the queen consort herself had been working to deliver their kingdom to foreign control was almost too shocking to comprehend, but the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Queen Isabella finally rose to respond to the accusations against her, but her defense was weak and unconvincing. She claimed that her contacts with Solarian representatives had been innocent diplomatic communications and that the genealogical research had been conducted in good faith based on documents she had believed to be authentic. Lord Blackwood attempted to support her denials, but his own involvement in creating the forged documents and pressuring Professor Whitmore made his protestations transparently self-serving. The conspiracy's careful construction had become its weakness when exposed to scrutiny. Too many people had been involved for effective damage control. King Edmund allowed both conspirators to present their defense before rendering his judgment. When they had finished their futile attempts at explanation, the king rose with the full authority of his crown and pronounced sentence on the betrayal that had nearly destroyed his kingdom. Queen Isabella, the king declared with cold formality, "You stand accused of high treason against the crown of Valdoria, conspiracy to defraud the royal succession, and collaboration with foreign powers to compromise our kingdom's sovereignty. Lord Blackwood, You stand accused of the same charges, as well as fraud and corruption in your office as Lord Chancellor. The sentences were swift and decisive. Queen Isabella was stripped of her royal titles and privileges, banished from Valdoria forever, and forbidden from any contact with Prince Lucas, who would remain in the kingdom under his father's protection. Lord Blackwood was arrested immediately on charges of treason and fraud, facing the possibility of execution depending on the results of a formal trial. The fate of young Prince Lucas presented the most difficult decision for King Edmund. The boy was innocent of his mother's crimes, but his position in the succession had been irreparably compromised by the conspiracy conducted on his behalf. The king's solution demonstrated both wisdom and compassion. Lucas would remain a prince but would be removed from the line of succession, receiving a full education and noble title while living under royal protection. Prince William's position as heir apparent was formally reaffirmed, with the council unanimously rejecting any challenges to his bloodline or fitness for rule. The young prince had remained silent throughout the revelations about his stepmother's betrayal, but Marcus could see the pain and confusion in his eyes as he processed the magnitude of what had been done to him. As the formal proceedings concluded, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him from a simple guard overhearing a suspicious conversation to a key witness in exposing the most serious threat to Valdorian independence in centuries. His decision to investigate rather than ignore what he had heard had literally saved his kingdom from foreign domination. The aftermath of the Grand Council meeting brought both relief and sadness to Valdoria Palace. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the emotional cost had been enormous. King Edmund had lost the wife he had loved, Prince William had lost the stepmother who had betrayed him, and young Prince Lucas had lost both his mother and his anticipated future as king. Marcus found himself promoted to captain of the royal guard in recognition of his service to the crown, but the honor felt hollow given the circumstances that had made it possible. He had done his duty and saved his kingdom, but the victory had come at a terrible cost to the royal family he had sworn to protect. Queen Isabella departed Valdoria 3 days after the Grand Council meeting, escorted to the border by royal guards and forbidden from ever returning to the kingdom she had tried to betray. Her final words to King Edmund were a request for mercy toward their son Lucas, the only aspect of her conspiracy that had shown any genuine maternal concern. Lord Blackwood's trial proceeded quickly, with the evidence against him so overwhelming that his conviction was never in doubt. He was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment rather than execution, partly in recognition of his previous years of service to the crown, and partly to avoid making him a martyr for any remaining Solarian sympathizers. The revelation of the conspiracy sent shockwaves throughout the region as other kingdoms realized how close Solaria had come to achieving dominance over Valdoria through infiltration and manipulation. Diplomatic relations with Solaria were severed completely, and new security protocols were implemented to prevent similar foreign interference in the future. Prince William gradually adjusted to his stepmother's absence and the knowledge of her betrayal, demonstrating the resilience and wisdom that would serve him well as future king. His relationship with his father was strengthened by their shared ordeal, and his compassion toward his half-brother Lucas showed the character that Marcus had always admired. Young Prince Lucas struggled more with the dramatic changes in his circumstances, but he was provided with careful guidance and support to help him understand his new position. The boy's natural intelligence and good nature suggested that he would find happiness and purpose in his revised role as a supporting member of the royal family. For Marcus, life gradually returned to something approaching normal, though he would never again underestimate the importance of paying attention to suspicious activities around the palace. His experience had taught him that the greatest threats to the kingdom might come from the most trusted sources, and that vigilance was the price of freedom. The conspiracy had been exposed and defeated, but its lessons would influence Valdorian policy for generations to come. The kingdom had learned that even the most intimate royal relationships could be compromised by foreign influence, and that the price of independence required constant attention to potential threats from within as well as without. King Edmund ruled for many more years, wiser but sadder for his experience with betrayal. Prince William eventually ascended to the throne and proved to be an exceptional monarch, guided by the lessons learned during the crisis that had nearly cost him his inheritance. Prince Lucas grew into a valued advisor to his half-brother, finding fulfillment in service to the kingdom rather than dominion over it. Marcus served faithfully as captain of the royal guard until his retirement, always remembering the night when he chose to investigate suspicious voices rather than continuing his patrol. That single decision had changed the course of Valdorian history and preserved the independence of a kingdom that had almost fallen to the most sophisticated betrayal in its long and proud history. The crown's secret had been revealed, the conspiracy had been defeated, and Valdoria remained free. But the cost of that victory would be remembered forever in the palace halls where trust had been betrayed, and loyalty had been tested in the crucible of foreign intrigue and domestic treachery.